Welcome to Conveyancing Matters with Lorraine and Stu. Join us for a chat about all things property.
Hello, Mr. Forsdyke. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Yourself, Lauren?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, lovely. So we've got a little new feature, little new news feature, in fact, for Conveyancing Matters. It struck me that there are quite a lot of things that we talk about as sort of individual topics, Stu, that actually, our viewers might like to see perhaps some of the key sort of newsy things for conveyancers, really that just interest us, I have to say, rather than any sort of comprehensive, attempt to. And so perhaps once a month or so, we ought to have a little news feature where we just bring together some of the sort of news issues and things that might have passed conveyancers by or things they need to be looking out for. So Conveyancing Matters does monthly news, I think.
Sounds very good. Yeah.
So where do you want to start, mate?
Well, shall we hit ourselves with the Land Registry? What do you think?
Yeah, let's.
Yeah. So after, what should we say? How should we describe the Land Registry's last sort of year? After a bit of a hard year for the Land Registry, they've of course come out and hit us with an increase in their pricing. So what do we think about that?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? To be fair to the Land Reg, they have on all their guff said, first price increase since 2009, I think it is. I think, and to be fair, I'm going to steal your lines, Stu, because I think it's probably it's not necessarily the level of the fees themselves, but I think, as you quite rightly said off air a week or so ago, it's the fact that they've given us actually relatively little notice of the fact that the fees are going to go up. They make the point that if it's a postal application, they're going up by sort of 20-something%. But if it's your ordinary portal application, it's 11 or so percent. But I don't think it's the level of the increase. It's your point, isn't it, Stu? It's the timing and the fact that these fees are going up. When was it? End of Jan?
End of Jan, yeah. Certainly, I don't think anybody
31st of January 2022.
That's the one. I don't think anybody would argue that the level of increase isn't warranted. It's just literally the way they announced it when they did, and the fact that there will be transactions whereby clients will have been quoted the old fee, and of course we're not going to get them registered in time, and therefore there'll be an increase. So it's the volume of clients that firms have to contact now to pre-warn of the Land Registry's increased in fees. And of course that really could have been avoided if they'd given us another couple of months, done it a bit earlier. They must have known that was coming.
Yeah. And
maybe it would have been a bit of an easier transition for law firms to deal with.
I think so. I just think it's a bit short-sighted of the Land Reg, because to be fair, I think they are a well thought of organisation. They do do a lot. I'm not saying they're perfect by any means, but and I think that a lot of what they're doing is a considerable improvement. But also what I noticed, particularly in the context of the electronic signatures work that I've done over the last sort of 12-18 months, Stu, is that their habit now is to make quite a lot of their sort of big announcements actually via their blog. So a tip that I would give conveyancers out there is actually subscribe to the Land Registry's blog and subscribe to the Land Registry's sort of updates that just ping into your email box, because that's a really good way of just keeping up to date, and they literally drop into your email inbox. But I think fees going up on the 31st of Jan 2022 does mean a couple of things. As you say, firstly, firms need to be making sure that they tell their clients. Of course, at the very least, you probably need to be dropping an email to your clients and making sure that perhaps you put the increased fee on your completion statement. So at least you haven't got that really annoying situation where post completion you're 20-30 quid down on X number of files because you're short on the Land Registry fees, because as we know, the lenders don't care, and if you're short, the lenders are just going to expect the firm to put their hands in the pockets to make up the shortfall. So there's going to be lots of firms, I think, fannying around in the first quarter of next year just writing off 20-30 quid a file because they've not actually recovered them from the client. So drop your clients an email now and remember to pick up the higher fee, because it's going to be easier to refund a fee than it is to actually try and get your client to pay it. But of course, whichever way you cut that cake, Stu, it's annoying admin. It's annoying post-completion admin for firms. We just chatted to somebody else on a different and recorded a different matters chat, and one of the points you made very well about the pressures on conveyances is the post-completion work, and clearly just fannying around with higher fees at short notice is just another thing to add to that list, isn't it?
It is, and of course it could easily have been avoided if they gave us a bit more notice, another couple of months, and we probably wouldn't really have had this conversation, would we?
I agree. So next thing then, Stu, still with the Land Reg in mind, is an issue that they've given us 12 months notice of, and the fact that most applications are going to be required to be the digital applications from November 2022. So you probably sort of understand more about that as you're Mr. Tech Boy than I do.
Christ, I would never ever use that expression. I'm not a tech boy at all. Blimey, I don't know where you got that from.
Well, you do. You get prop tech people telling you stuff all the time.
I can use my mobile phone.
Yeah, I can do bold and italic.
On and off.
I've got bold and italic on my mug. Look, be bold and italic, but never regular.
But I mean, I think that's a step in the right direction. I think realistically, that was never going to last once they'd made those steps to allow digital registration. It was only going to go one way, wasn't it? So I think most firms now surely are set up to do digital registrations, and you don't think? No, they're not. No, I can promise you. No, they're absolutely not. So the distinction is broadly that obviously firms log on via their usernames and passwords to the portal and are scanning stuff and uploading stuff to the portal at the moment. If you haven't got this far yet, or if your firm hasn't got this far, what the Land Reg has introduced, sort of piloted to start with, but what they've introduced is digital applications, whereby instead of fannying around filling in AP1s and scanning them, you're sort of inputting the information into a sort of live land registry system. And what that's doing is not allowing you to move on to the next step of the registration process until that bit's right. And what apparently it's doing as of, beginning of December, where we are now, the Land Reg, I think, if I'm right in saying, have done something like 100,000 applications have been submitted that way. And the Land Registry's own data is showing that something like 25, that's resulted in a 25% reduction in the number of post-completion requisitions. So it is a very, very significant thing. But what firms need to be doing is in the next few months to be getting geared up to using the digital land registry processes for making their registration applications, because that's going to become, unless they, pull the plug a bit later because enough firms haven't got onto the bandwagon yet, but that's going to become, according to the Land Reg, mandatory from November 2022. So probably not a big deal for PCS, I would guess, Stu, but I suspect we've been using it for a while now, and I must say, I think if anything, it's improved the way we make our applications. Like you say, there is a layer built in now that stops you from submitting things when maybe they're not quite ready. So
yeah, I think it's a great idea.
I think it's a massive positive.
It's absolutely the direction of travel for the Land Reg. There's no doubt about it. I've been on a Land Reg forum on and off for a little while, and digital is definitely the way they're going without any shadow of a doubt. It always was. It started with the Land Registration Act, but most people watching this will be too young to remember. So there are two Land Reg things we wanted to mention. So what did you want to mention next then, Stu?
So I think maybe we could bring up that sort of your favourite subject, cladding.
Yes.
It's been in the news recently again, hasn't it? So nothing really too substantial to talk about, but of course, Gove has come out, hasn't he, and has addressed the fact that it is an issue and it's something he's going to be looking at.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, as you say, sort of one of the big sort of tragedies of our time, really, I think, both obviously in terms of Grenfell and of course the massive impact on the poor leaseholders sitting in flats that they can't sell. And I think, again, it's a point you've made, Stu, that probably the impact on conveyancers is less so, because as you've observed, transactions tend to fall apart before they get to us, really. But really just for our, lovely colleagues in the conveyancing world to be aware that there was an idea that leaseholders might be made to sort of take out low value, low cost loans to fund cladding remediation works, and Michael Gove, to be fair, has sort of pulled the plug on that idea, at least for the time being. Yeah. And really, I think we could probably lump leasehold reform into this category as well, Stu. It's just a watching brief. I mean, I very rarely sort of report on something until it's actually on the statute books, because I think if we got our knickers in a twist about every policy geek, policy donkey point that became an issue for politicians, we'd never get anything done, because really until it's on the statute books and it's introduced and it impacts on us, I'm always a bit skeptical. And I think I have to say I think the same to some degree about leasehold reform. I think
there's a slight difference in that, though, is still what's the right way of putting it? With Greenfield, the emotions that kind of brought
I completely agree.
Means that it's a different subject to maybe leasehold reform. I'm not quite sure.
I sort of
leasehold reform doesn't exactly get people emotional, does it? But
I agree. But I think certainly when I train Stu, what I try and do is say to conveyancers, right, this is what this means for you in practice today.
Yeah.
This is how this is going to impact on your job today. So, we can all be aware of the big picture, but actually what people really want to know from the likes of me is how does that feed into the transactions I've got going through now? And I do therefore think that, what I meant therefore is that the cladding and the leasehold, they are absolutely things to keep on a watching brief, but until they get on the statute books, they're not going to, we're still going to have to deal with difficult leasehold matters, and we're still going to have to deal with, short leases, crappy ground rents, cladded properties, dodgy WS1 certificates, and the rest of it, really. Well, we did a sort of separate chat, Stu, about the troubles that the Simplify group are going through, and don't really want to sort of rehearse those points. But, and again, something we did mention, but perhaps towards the end of that chat. So do you just want to mention, Stu, the property alert service? People have mentioned it, but I'm still amazed how many conveyancers don't recommend it.
Yeah, of course. Something that's obviously come up recently, especially with the Vicar case and all that. But I'm really, really surprised that it's getting a traction that it has recently, insofar as I'm surprised how few people have been recommending it and ultimately using it. For example, we've sort of chucked it in our sort of deeds to client letter. Once something's registered, we send a copy of the title to the client, we email it over. I'm gobsmacked that people haven't been sort of having a footnote in there about that property alert service, advertising the fact that it's free. Seems a win-win to me. I think we've sort of half covered previously whether firms should actually automatically input that data, which I'm not a fan of, but It just seems an absolute win-win to have a standardized paragraph in your standard reports telling clients it's something they should do.
Yeah, absolutely. The Land Registry's free property alert service. A registered proprietor can input up to, I think it's 10 title numbers, so good for buy-to-let investors and so on as well. And it does what it says on the tin. As you say, Stu, it's free. And if there is any activity with that on that title, the most obvious one, of course, being an OS1 that a hapless buyer's conveyancer might be putting in, if there's, they're about to complete on a fraudulent matter, and you will then get an email alert telling you that there's been some activity on that account, which would enable you to take action, hopefully before a fraud took place and you lost your home, and the buyer, the conveyancer and the lender were left in the shtuck that we've seen people left in. I absolutely agree with you, Stu. There has been wild comments on social media, as you say, about should the conveyancer be setting that up for the client, and I absolutely don't think we should. I think, as you say, you inform your clients about it, maybe stick an extra bit on your website, maybe put a link on your website through to the property alert service on the Land Registry's website. But beyond that, I think very firmly that's where conveyancers' duties should end. But and sometimes I worry when I'm training, Stu, I think, oh, am I teaching people to suck eggs? And am I saying things that are terribly obvious? But I think I forget how busy people get. And actually some of these things can just sort of pass people by. really, and pass practitioners by. And actually on the simplify front, just again, perhaps to make firms aware, clearly it appears there was some sort of cyber issue, absolutely there, but for the grace of God, go us all. But firms might be interested to know that the National Cyber Security Centre, just Google it, they've got a little free sort of training webinar on sort of top tips for your staff in relation to sort of cyber security. As I say, it's free, it's pretty short, it's pretty well put together, quite why firms wouldn't want, as I say, with the sort of simplify spectre in mind. Clearly firms need to be looking at their IT, you know, firewalls, policies, procedures, talking to their IT providers and all the big stuff. But as we always say, Stu, you know, your staff are your biggest line of defence and exactly at the same time a firm's biggest risk. So anything that firms can do to just increase that awareness of staff, and we don't know what the issues were at Simplify, I might add, but anything to bring that sort of back to the top of people's minds. And I think that National Cyber Security Centre training training session, why wouldn't you want to ask your staff to do it? I think is the point I'm making.
Definitely. Even some real loose advice, just reminding people, and particularly maybe some of the junior members of staff, you know, not to click or open documents where they're, you know, not 100% as to where it's come from. Probably wouldn't go amiss either, even on that basic sort of level. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, and I say this a lot when I'm training. What worries me about sort of cyber risks more generally, Stu, is, and I know I've said this before, is the risks become a bit like sort of your wallpaper. It's there all the time, so you don't see it anymore.
Yeah.
If you had to describe something in your office, you mentioned earlier a bookcase, you've probably got, I don't know, God knows how many books on your bookcase, but if you had to tell me what they were, you wouldn't be able to tell me because they're there all the time and you see them all the time. They've probably been there for years. It's exactly the same in my mind with cyber risk, because because firms bang on about it all the time, and it's an ever-present risk, and every time something comes into your inbox it's a risk. We all just go, you know, and given the pressure that conveyancing staff have been under, it still must represent one of the biggest risks to firms. So get your staff doing that freebie training session, just to get it back in people's minds is what I perhaps wanted to you know, point out really. So any other newsy thing you wanted to mention, Stu?
So I suppose, how about being topical, and we're obviously filming this after a recent government announcement, so COVID riders and clauses have kind of crept back in.
Yeah, they're back into the conveyancing sort of discussion, aren't they? We're sort of back on plan B. Are we going to be going to plan B plus or plan C? Are we potentially facing a lockdown of some description in early in the new year? A lot of the COVID impacts now, and there is new guidance on the government website about moving house specifically. So if you haven't looked at that, you ought to go and look at it, albeit I think it's fair to say that probably impacts more on directly on our estate agency colleagues than our conveyancing colleagues. But yes, from a conveyancing point of view, COVID clauses, COVID riders in the contract for sale, you know, yes or no, are they a good thing? Personally, my take on it has always been they're more trouble than they're worth, and conveyancers, I think, have been pretty pragmatic. Ultimately, you just need to advise your client, and your client decides and instructs you accordingly. But of course, the bottom line with the COVID rider is I think they try to anticipate too much, and B, I think what people don't realise is if you're in a chain, every contract would have to have the same COVID rider in it. And I think that's what our colleagues perhaps sometimes forget, is that you can't have a situation where you've got to do, you're under different contractual obligations on your sale than you are on your purchase. So, you know, when we discussed this, I don't know, 12, 18 months ago, Stu, what view did you tend to take in practice?
Exactly the same as yours. I just thought they were, you know, as you've said, more trouble than they were worth. I thought you were opening up a can of worms here, to the extent that, you know, making a clause that would actually be fit for purpose, I thought was very difficult. And in my opinion, getting that wrong was greater risk than not having it there in the first place. And I always fall back to that same old sort of standpoint that, we're here to advise our clients, about the implications of what they do, not necessarily make decisions. And from my sort of real simple kind of thought process, we advise our clients, this is the world that we are currently living in. This is what's going on, as you know. You're no more expert than I am with regards to COVID, and therefore, if you're going to exchange contracts, what that means is that when you agree that date, it is fixed. And if COVID rears its ugly head and prevents that from going on, these are the implications, and this is what you stand to lose, or these are your liabilities. So, it's up to you whether you go ahead knowing that to be the case. There are, of course, alternatives to committing yourself. You can, if the transaction allowed, do a simultaneous exchange and completion. So it's not as if there aren't other alternatives.
Yeah, I think what shocked me, and certainly when I used to travel around the country for much loved CLT, I was very, very sad when CLT ceased to be, not just personally for my work, but just generally, because they were generally a lovely bunch of people. But I used to travel around the country a lot, and what I was always very shocked about, Stu, and this has been over the last sort of 10 or 15 years, this isn't a new thing by any means, and I would go to places like Leeds and Manchester and find that, and this was a consistent thing, and find that they did simultaneous exchange and completions, i.e. exchanging and completing on the same day, really, really, really regularly. That was point one. When I asked them why, they would say, well, that's because the client and the agent told us that's what was happening. And I wondered, tail wagging the dog there. But also it had become the norm. But I did say to a lot of people on my courses, Stu, have you explained the risks of a simultaneous to your client? And they all looked at me as if I'd just climbed off the moon. Different issue, but different risks. That's still the fact that there isn't a binding contract on the day that everybody has agreed to complete is just a different risk that your client's got to understand. So if during the first lockdown conveyancing lovelies, you didn't sort of review your standard report and standard guff and make sure your advice to clients on a simultaneous exchange and completion and the risks, if that's not up to date, or if you haven't got any, then my observation would be get that ready now, because you're likely to be needing it in the next sort of 2 or 3, 4 months, I would say. But I couldn't believe how many firms didn't actually advise on the implications of having no contract.
I think people sometimes get caught in their own bubble. And what I mean by that is, we often forget, don't we, that when we exchange contracts with a date, let's just say a week, 2 weeks in advance, there are numerous things that can go wrong.
Yeah.
A material change in client circumstances, if they got made redundant, something like that, if their credit status changed, that can lead, for example, to a mortgage offer being withdrawn. There are lots of risks. So if you bring that into context, I think people focus COVID on being a big risk to exchanging, but there's loads of risks when a client goes and exchanges. So there's got to be a balance to it, hasn't there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Nobody'd ever move otherwise. And like you say, the counter offering also comes with risks. But as long as you've explained these risks to a client, it's for the client to then make that decision as to what they want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, another little piece of news that I'm not sure whether whether conveyancers are going to feel very excited about, but they might like to know that apparently on the 11th of Jan 2022, Stu, we're going to have a new form LPE1, we're going to have a new form LPE2 and a new FME1. So basically your leasehold management forms and your freehold management. So if you've got a freehold site but with a shared managed area, that's your FME1, and of course your LPE1, your sort of leasehold management pack type form. They've been updated. Law Society, lots of organisations have sort of subscribed to them. Probably make sure that your forms provider is going to provide the new forms on however you source those forms. You might want to put them side by side just to sort of check the old and the new. But I think it's fair to say, Stu, your view is likely to be, well, it's all very well having new forms, but what about the management companies? Am I right?
Exactly that. I'm not sure this is going to be groundbreaking, is it? Unfortunately, I think we'll still have the same problems in terms of cost and turnaround time. They're probably the biggest two entities, aren't they, to why this subject matter is a problem.
I think what firms need to do, as I say, is compare the old with the new and find out with the new version of the form, Stu, whether there's anything on there that they think, gosh, yes, that's information I would really, really like. Because what I can see and anticipate is that the some, not all, but some management companies are just going to carry on churning out the old forms. And of course, because as you well know, lots of these organizations will just have them sort of basically pre-completed on their system, and they'll press print. They're not going to want to bother to recast and reconsider the forms. So I suspect, and there's no compunction, so I do think it's quite important that conveyancers do know the difference between the forms, so that if there's anything they do feel strongly about, they can try and
I think we're absolutely miles away from being anywhere near having a management company consider new forms. Even now, we still get management companies where they might not be a fire risk assessment. Even now, despite how long we've been banging on about fire risk assessments, even now, not all management companies are aware of their obligations. So to have a new form, like you say, I think it's all going to be pre-saved information, pre-documented, and that's what you're going to be given.
And it's still going to take them 8 weeks and 500 quid to produce it. Well, and on the issue of management companies, actually, another little newish thing that's popped into my mind that, again, in the melee of the last few months might have passed conveyancers by, is the Land Registry have produced a new sort of standardised form to deal with restriction, consents and certificates, form RXC. And it occurred to me that would be particularly useful in relation to management company restrictions, because what the Land Registry draw a distinction between is a restriction that requires a consent and a restriction that requires a certificate. They're different things. And the Land Registry is also wanting consent to registration of the disposition to be given, not just consent to a transaction. And what worries me, again, dare I say it, is that far too many conveyancers just assume that they are going to get the appropriate document from a management company, in particular where there's a leasehold restriction sort of post completion, without considering before exchange, well, what needs to be done to comply with that restriction, and to actually ask the management company to produce a draft of whatever it is they're going to hand over. Because if you don't get that, your registration isn't going to get completed. And you do see on some of the other conveyancing sort of news feeds and so on, conveyancers who their registrations are shot to pieces because they haven't got the appropriate restriction consent from the management company, perhaps months later. And it's probably because the conveyancer didn't think about it in advance. So the idea is form RXC is a standard form. The Land Reg has got stuff on their website about how to complete it. It's only been relatively recently introduced to, and already the Land Registry is on its second version of the form. So it's not without, but I do think conveyancers need to be thinking more generally, much more carefully about leasehold restrictions on registers before exchange. That would be my thing.
Sometimes think also, do we actually explain this to a client enough?
No,
I don't think we do. I don't think
just
we
see
ever
it as
really
part of the registration post completion.
But I think we should be explaining to the client, this is why we need it, and these are the implications if we don't receive it.
Well, and also
selling what we do,
and also a role in that thought forward. Of course, this is something that's going to. Some clients won't even realise it's on their register until they come to sell.
Yeah.
And if they haven't been told about it when they purchased, they're then suddenly going to turn around 3, 4, 5 years later and say, well, hang on a minute, what's on my register that's causing a problem now? Nobody told me about that when I purchased, because it's just seemed to be standard. But if you haven't sort of heard about or thought about the form RXC, there's lots about it on the Land Reg website. And to be completely fair to the Land Reg, they've got lots of resources on their website. Again, videos explaining about stuff, webinars and so on. And I think firms should really be looking at that. So, anything else you want to mention, Stu?
I think we don't want to end the first sort of news news feature on a negative one, but there's also been a recent, article in the media, hasn't there, about a conveyancer that had to go as far as calling the police as their sort of vexated clients at their offices, or should we say other people in the chain, not even their clients.
Yeah, not even their client. I mean, I remember years ago, I used to have to say to my staff very, very occasionally, oh, well, if the client on the other side of our transaction rings you, then, we can't deal with them. But now this has taken that to a whole new level. And as you say, a poor conveyancer, I think I jotted it down, harassment from the buyer, 32 identical emails in 10 minutes after midnight. And she said, I think it was a she, and it was originally reported in Legal Futures, actually. I've done this job for 37 years and I'm used to dealing with abusive people on the phone, but this clearly was an absolutely different level. And as I say, there were just multiple emails, as I say, after midnight, harassment of the highest order. But of course, this does rather feed in, Stu, doesn't it, to the discussion we had, a few months ago that got a fair bit of traction just around, dare I say, the sort of general abuse that clients seem to think it's acceptable to give their conveyancers these days.
Unfortunately so. It seems to be a bit of a sort of a cultural thing now that anybody, it could be the estate agent, it could be an agent not even in your part of the chain, clients, that more particularly other people in the chain that are not your clients, might even be the father of somebody at the top of a chain that's going mad. And we've had that plenty of occasions over the last year, and it's really, really, really frustrating because, of course, you cannot reveal anything to that client.
No.
We had a recent one where there was a limited term on the lease. We had to do some reporting to the bank, waiting for the bank to revert to us. And then you've got the client at the top of the chain sort of on the phone, threatening all sorts, threatening to come down to the office.
I know.
It's so difficult because you understand people's frustrations and you want to show empathy, but of course you can't reveal information about your client to them. So what do you do?
Well, that's the problem. You have to suck it up and take it and hope your employer is going to support you. Or, of course, you do what we've been talking about a lot lately. You decide to go do something else, which is, it's grim. But I think, Stu, for our first sort of newsy Conveyancing Matters, and actually be really interested to know what people think quite genuinely. So if you've got any comments, any observations, we'd be really happy to hear from you. But we don't have to end on a negative, because I'm going to say, Stu, I'm going to say Modern Law Awards. I'm going to say PCS Legal, an award. Come on.
Oh, I did say not to mention that, but we
don't hide your light under a bushel, as they say, or something. Did they say that?
I've never heard that. But,
it's okay. My nan told me.
I don't know what on earth you're talking about, but yeah. But yeah, so I mean, us and many other firms recently attended the Modern Law Awards, and it was a fantastic evening. They always host that really well in Liverpool, and congratulations to all the winners of all the awards.
And congratulations to PCS Legal for getting an award. I was really delighted for you. Just really sad that I couldn't be with you at that one. I really wanted to be
you
there.
Just missed the drinking, that was all.
Yeah, that too, actually. I think I did quite well at the ESTAS. I managed to not completely embarrass myself. I think if we'd got into that red room, I think that might have all gone horribly wrong. So, so I'm really quite glad. Actually, in retrospect, I was a bit annoyed at the time, but I just think for all concerned, it was probably better. I didn't end up in the red room at the Grosvenor at 7 o'clock at night. But anyway, Stu, well, thanks for that. I hope that people have found that interesting. As I say, our first newsy catch up. We will, I think, do this fairly regularly. I think it seems like a good idea.
Yeah, I think we can try and get it out once a month, and I think it will enable us hopefully to discuss some of the maybe smaller topics that don't sort of warrant maybe talking about for half hour, but we can put them all together in the pot, can't we? And start to chat about them.
Well, and hopefully what we can bring to the party, Stu, whether other lovely organisations will just say here's the issue, but actually what you and I can do is perhaps unpick a little bit how that will impact on practitioners. I think that's perhaps hopefully what we'll be able to bring to the party. So thanks for that, Stu. I will
no problem,
see you soon.
I'll see you soon. Take care.
Okay.